We did a psychometric analysis of the clumping together of beliefs that are associated with liberalism and conservatism. And look, the way you do that's fairly straightforward from a scientific perspective. What you do first is oversample the domain of liberal and conservative attitudes. And so you get a bunch of people out gathering, say, statements of belief that the press, that are commonly regarded as falling on the liberal to conservative continuum. And you're agnostic about that. You overgather them. So imagine that there's a target that you're trying to hit, and what you do is you circumscribe an area that's larger than the target purposefully. And then what you do is you provide the items to thousands of people if you can do it, and you can do that online now, and you get them to indicate their agreement or disagreement with each item. And then you can subject the set of items and responses to a process called factor analysis. And what factor analysis does is show you which groups of questions are answered as a group in the same direction. So for example, if I ask you if you're a happy person, and I ask you if you smile a lot, and I ask you if you're sad, there's going to be a very high correlation, one of them negative, between those three items. And so the factor analysis will say, look, all these items are very highly correlated. And so you can think of them as an entity. Okay, so we've identified three dimensions to liberalism versus conservatism, which I won't talk about at the moment, and two dimensions to political correctness. Now, the first news is, so we did the same thing with political correctness. We got a bunch of people, research assistants, graduate students, to say, okay, go out into the media and find a whole bunch of statements that appear to be associated with what people have been calling political correctness. Okay, so then we'll make a questionnaire. We made a questionnaire with several hundred items. We administered it to a very large number of people, and we did a factor analysis, and we got two factors. And the first factor was radical egalitarianism, which was primarily predicted by trait agreeableness, which breaks down into compassion and politeness on the positive side.
Let me stop you there. So
Yep.
just to predict where this is going. So
Yep.
the more radical egalitarian you are, the more you would score highly on the penchant for being parasitized by politically correct beliefs, correct?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
The higher you are, the higher you are, actually, it's the higher you are in trait agreeableness, the more susceptible you are to this particular group of beliefs. Okay, and so the first factor is radical egalitarianism. But the second factor looked like left-wing authoritarianism. It was really the desire for language control. And we found some very interesting predictors of that. One of them was orderliness, which is an element of conscientiousness. And we know orderliness is a predictor of right-wing authoritarianism. But we also found that it was associated negatively with verbal cognitive ability very powerfully. I'm going to say that again.
Right.
The tendency to control language
Right.
was very powerfully negatively associated with verbal cognitive ability. In fact, the relationship between the negative relationship between verbal cognitive ability and the proclivity to hold viewpoints that were desirous of language control was higher than the relationship between verbal ability and academic grades. It's an extraordinary powerful relationship. But I think it's a very important study because it does a bunch of things. First, it shows that there is such a thing as political correctness, although it has two dimensions. It shows that the personality predictors of political correctness are not the same as the personality predictors of liberalism. Okay, so political correctness is not an extreme form of liberalism. It's its own animal. Say that, and agreeableness sounds like a positive trait, but every trait has its virtues and faults. And the problem with agreeableness is that agreeable people are easy to push around, and they find it difficult to stand up for themselves. So you could imagine that in any given discussion about anything, in any negotiation, I'm somewhat for me and somewhat for you. And if I'm really, really agreeable, I'm more for you than I am for me. It's a marker of maternal behavior, roughly speaking. And women are higher in agreeableness than men. And that's true in Scandinavia, too, for all you people listening who think that all those sorts of things are only cultural constructs, which they most certainly are not. And the data on that is clear. So, and disagreeable people, like if you're negotiating with a disagreeable person, it's more for them than for you. And so if you go to the extremes of disagreeable, you find men in prisons.
Right.
And if you go to the extremes of agreeable, well, you find social justice warriors, roughly speaking. Like, the university is where things are going. And so if you care about where things are going, you should pay bloody close attention to what's happening in the universities, especially because the universities are training people for positions of leadership. And that is what universities do. And it's worked out really well, because we have, in my estimates, between 300,000 and 3 million social justice warrior types now active in North America at all levels of every institution. And they're having their influence felt. That's absolutely for sure.
How did you come up with this estimate?
Well, I tried to count. I tried to do a rough count, say, of women's studies programs and social work programs and the other sort of radically left-leaning programs that are part and parcel of the modern university, and just did a rough estimate of how many students they're generating. And it's a very rough estimate, but 300,000 is certainly too low, and 3 million might be too high, but it's somewhere in there, and that's a massive number of people. And then one of the things to remember is they're actually trained to be activists. And you might think, well, that sounds a bit paranoid. It's like, it's not paranoid at all you have to do, just do it yourself. Go look up a dozen women's studies programs online, or any of the sort of gender and ethnic group studies programs, because I would say they're the worst offenders. They trumpet proudly the fact that they're basically producing social revolutionaries whose goal is to bring down the patriarchy. And the question is, well, what the hell is the patriarchy? And that's another one of these small monsters that surrounds the central monster. The patriarchy is culture, our culture. And say what you want about our culture, it has a negative and positive element, just like every culture always has. Compared to every other culture, it's doing pretty damn well. And so when you say you want to bring it down, you want to destroy the patriarchy, just exactly what the hell is it that you're destroying?
Well, and if you're really concerned about women's rights and women's well-being, and you want to fight the patriarchy, there are places in the world where there truly is a highly operative patriarchy.
You mean like Saudi Arabia?
Oh, I didn't say it. I don't know. Of course.
Saudi Arabia, our putative allies. Those people are not our allies.
Right.
And if Western feminists had the courage of their convictions, they would be outraged.
But who are we to judge whether stoning and the cutting off of clitoris is a good or bad thing, right? It's all morally relativist, right? I'm being sarcastic.
And that's where these sorts of arguments run into their own, that's where they face the consequences of their own internal contradictions.
Right.
Yes, I mean, the things that go on in those societies are absolutely horrifying. The idea that, the constant complaints about Western rape culture in the context of no comments whatsoever on what's happening in places in Saudi Arabia, it's patently absurd. But it also gives you some more insight into the actual motivations of the radical leftists, because when push comes to shove, they would rather pursue their destabilizing ideology than solve the problems that they're hypothetically concerned about. And I don't believe they're concerned about the damn problems anyways. I outlined what I see as the politically correct game in the third video I did. The politically correct game basically involves taking a domain of human activity, whatever it happens to be, in any corporation or any organization or any club, wherever there's numbers of people, noting that there's a distribution of success. So there are people who are relatively successful and people who are relatively unsuccessful by any axis of measurement: happiness, wealth, productivity, creativity, you name it. Deciding that those who are doing well are oppressing those who are doing not so well, and that's why they're not doing so well. Identifying with the putative victims and claiming moral superiority. Well, that's the game, and that's, I would say, the second monster, I truly believe that people who are committed to that game will do anything rather than stop playing it. And the reason they're playing it is, there's two reasons: technical reasons, psychological reasons. If you have a comprehensive explanation for everything, then it decreases uncertainty and anxiety and reduces your cognitive load. And if you can use that simplifying algorithm to put yourself on the side of moral virtue, then you're constantly a good person with a minimum of effort. Yeah, well, I don't like that game. And another reason that I won't say the words that I'm being required to say is because I believe the words are products of that game, and I'm not going to play that game. I think it's a game that's dangerous beyond belief. And I do think that it's contributing in no small part to the rise of the radical right, and among young people, which is a social phenomena that's very unsettling, to say the least. Those people, I got some descriptions of the radical alt-right's viewpoint, you know, and I'm not painting everyone on the right with the same brush. I'm speaking very specifically of the neo-Nazi types on the alt-right. Those people, literally, they're pro-Hitler. They're so anti-Semitic that it's painful to read. It's
I receive a lot of their stuff. I'm one of the victims of some of their stuff, so I know all about it.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Well, it's very frightening to me to see young people turning in droves to that sort of viewpoint. And that's especially young men. And that's happened many times in the 20th century. And the results were not good. You know, so my dystopian viewpoint is we'll keep up what we're doing with all this radical push on the left. We'll keep generating monsters on the right. Then we'll have a nice economic crisis. And then we'll find out what trouble really is.
Right.
And so I'd rather we didn't go down that road. I think, well, how about if we discuss these things? How about we sort them out?